47 years I have sat in this confessional booth, and the wood has molded itself to my spine, curved around my shoulders like a second ribcage grown from termite-hollowed oak. The grain of it knows every shift of my posture, every lean toward the great when a penitent's voice drops too low, every recoil when their sins prove too vivid. I am Marcus Denning, keeper of the third veil at the shrine of perpetual absolution on Verdantis 7, and until 6 days ago, I believed I understood what sacrifice meant. The penitent on the other side of the grate was weeping. Her name was Cassia Thorne, a factor from the Agra Collective in the southern provinces, and she had come 400 kilometers by foot as penance for thoughts of doubt. Her feet were wrapped in blood-soaked rags. Her voice came through the grate like sand through a sieve, gritty and exhausted. I questioned, she said. When my daughter died in the harvester, I questioned his plan. The Emperor's design encompasses all suffering, I said, the words worn smooth by decades of repetition. Your daughter's death served a purpose you cannot perceive from your limited vantage, but that's what haunts me, Keeper. Her breath hitched. I dreamed the answer. I dreamed I understood why she died, and the understanding was worse than the grief. I dreamed she was always meant to die in that exact moment, in that exact way, because her death would cause me to walk here, to this shrine, to speak these exact words to you. I had heard variations of this confession perhaps 10,000 times. The faithful often convince themselves their suffering connects to some grand narrative. It is a comfort mechanism, a way of making the arbitrary meaningful. I opened my mouth to deliver the standard absolution, and in my dream, she continued before I could speak, you were standing at the end of a corridor made of bones, and you were reading from a book that contained your own obituary. You were reading the words aloud as you lived them, and you could not stop reading, and you could not look away. My hand stopped halfway to the blessing gesture. The booth suddenly felt smaller, the carved walls pressing inward. Through the grate I could see only the outline of her profile, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking. Did the God Emperor send you this dream? I asked, and my voice did not sound like my own. It sounded like I was hearing it through water. He sends all dreams, she whispered. That's what frightens me. That's what I confess, not my doubt, not my questioning. I confess that I believe he knew I would doubt before I was born. I confess that I believe my daughter was born to die so that I would doubt, so that I would walk here, so that I would tell you about the corridor of bones. And I confess that I believe you needed to hear it. The humming started then. Low, almost below the threshold of hearing, it vibrated through the wooden walls of the booth. I had heard this hum before, of course. Every structure on Verdantis 7 produces it, a resonance from the geothermal vents that riddle the planet's crust. The shrine itself was built atop a convergence of 17 such vents, and the first keepers believed the sound was the Emperor's voice made manifest through stone. After 47 years, I had stopped noticing it. But that day, after Cassia Thorne's confession, the hum seemed to pulse with intention. It rose and fell in patterns that almost resolved into syllables before dissolving back into meaningless tone. I granted her absolution. She limped away toward the pilgrim quarters. I sat in the dark of the confessional for 3 more hours, listening to the hum, waiting for more penitents who did not come. The Chronicle of Testimonies sits in my cell, a leather-bound ledger updated daily for the past 231 years. Every confession heard by the keepers of the Third Veil has been summarized, categorized, and archived within its pages. The book is thick as my arm and heavy enough to kill a man if swung with sufficient conviction. I have consulted it 10,000 times, searching for patterns in the sins of the faithful, looking for recurring spiritual maladies that might inform my counseling. 6 days ago, after Cassia Thorne left, I opened the Chronicle to record her confession. My stylus hovered over the page. The entry was already there. Factor Cassia Thorne, Agra Collective 7-7 Sigma, confession received day 891.m42. Contents, doubt following filial death, prophetic dream imagery involving Keeper Denning and structural bone architecture. Disposition, standard absolution granted. Note, this confession will trigger Keeper Denning's doubt cascade. See supplementary volume regarding anticipated crisis of faith. Third alcove, restricted archive. The handwriting was my own. The ink was fresh, still gleaming wet on the page, though I had not touched stylus to paper. I stared at the entry for a very long time. The geothermal hum rose in pitch as if pleased. My first assumption was forgery. Someone had broken into my cell, copied my hand, written this entry to destabilize me. Such things happen in the ecclesiarchy. Political maneuvering often wears theological masks. I examined the page under lamplight, searching for inconsistencies in stroke pressure, variations in letter form. The handwriting was perfect. Not just similar to mine, but identical in the way that only my own hand could produce. The slight tremor in my uppercase characters from an injury sustained in childhood. The idiosyncratic loop of my lowercase letters that Sister Meridia had once called aggressive. The slight rightward slant that increases when I am tired. The supplementary volume. The restricted archive. I had served at this shrine for 47 years and never heard of either. Senior Keeper Aldrich found me in the archive corridor at third bell, still searching. The old man moved like fog through the stone passages, his augmetic lungs wheezing a counterpoint to the geothermal hum. He was 112 years old, more machine than flesh below the neck, and he had presided over my ordination when I was 19 and certain about everything. "You found the entry," he said, "not a question. How long have you known about the Chronicle's peculiarities?" 73 years, since my own crisis. He settled onto a stone bench carved with scenes of martyrdom, and his joints clicked like counting beads. Every keeper of the third veil eventually finds an entry written in their own hand that they do not remember writing. It is the first test. Test of what? Of whether you can continue serving after you understand what service means. I wanted to strike him. The impulse shocked me. 47 years of discipline, and I wanted to break an old man's jaw for speaking in riddles. My hands shook at my sides. "The supplementary volume," I said. "Where is it?" "Third alcove, behind the reliquary of St. Cassian's finger bones." His augmetic eyes, those pale blue lenses that had replaced his organic sight decades ago, seemed to look through me rather than at me. "But I caution you, Marcus. Some find the contents comforting, others find them annihilating. There is no way to know which you will be until you read." "You've read it?" "Many times." I continue to read it. The pages that concern me are still being written. By whom? Aldrich's mechanical lungs cycled through a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a malfunction. By you, by me, by every keeper who ever served here, by the Emperor himself if you believe he works through mortal hands. Does it matter? The words appear. The words are true. The words describe events that have not yet occurred with the accuracy of events that have already been recorded in historical archives. The humming from the vents rose to a pitch I had never heard before, a sound like a choir singing a single sustained note at the edge of human hearing. Aldrich tilted, his head as if listening to words I could not perceive. "It's louder for you now," he said. "It will keep getting louder. Eventually you will hear it as language. That is the second test." I left him there in the corridor, his augmetic systems clicking and whirring, and I went to find the third alcove. The reliquary of St. Cassian contained 7 finger bones arranged in a gesture of blessing, preserved in a stasis field that had been maintained for 11,000 years. The bones were yellow-brown with age, and the nails were still attached, blackened and curling. St. Cassian had been a scribe who copied sacred texts for 40 years until his hands cramped into permanent claws. He had continued copying for another 30 years after that, dipping his ruined fingers in ink and dragging them across parchment through sheer force of devotion. The texts he produced in those final decades were said to be illegible to mortal eyes but perfectly clear to the Emperor's sight. Behind the reliquary, hidden by a wall hanging depicting the Emperor's ascension, I found a door I had never seen before. It was not a secret door in the conventional sense. It did not blend into the wall or disguise itself. It was simply a door I had walked past for 47 years without registering its existence. When I tried to remember those walks, I found the door had always been there in my memories, visible and unremarkable, and yet I had never opened it. The door was not locked. It opened onto a narrow staircase descending into the stone of the planet, below the level of the shrine's foundations, below the level of any structure I knew existed. The geothermal hum was louder here, and as I descended, it began to separate into layers, harmonic components that wove around each other like voices in a chant. The supplementary volume waited on a stone pedestal at the bottom of the stairs, in a chamber carved from living rock. The walls were covered in names. Thousands of names, tens of thousands, carved into the stone in letters no larger than grains of rice. I did not need to search to find my own. It glowed with a faint luminescence, as if my attention alone was enough to illuminate it. Below my name, connected by a carved line, was a date. The date was 3 days from now. The book itself was thick as a torso and bound in leather that did not feel like leather. The pages were not paper but something thinner, more translucent, like skin scraped to membrane thinness. I opened it to the first page, the Chronicle of Intended Sacrifices. The title read, "Being a complete account of all offerings made and to be made at the shrine of perpetual absolution from its founding unto the end of all things, as foreknown by the Emperor of mankind, beloved by all." I turned pages. Each entry was written in a different hand, each describing a sacrifice in precise detail. The pilgrim who would donate his eyes to the shrine's collection, the mother who would offer her son's ashes after the boy died of fever, the merchant who would give his fortune after losing everything to raiders, the soldier who would dedicate his remaining years to scrubbing the temple floors after wounds ended her career. Each entry was dated. Many of the dates were in the past, and when I cross-referenced them with the main chronicle upstairs, the events matched perfectly. But many more were in the future. Days, weeks, months, years, centuries, millennia, all recorded in past tense, as if they had already happened, as if time itself had been compressed into a single eternal moment where every sacrifice existed simultaneously. I found the entry for Cassia Thorne. It described her daughter's death, her walk to the shrine, her confession to me, her dream about the corridor of bones. It described my reaction, my doubt, my descent into this chamber. It described the words I was reading at this exact moment. Below her entry, connected by that same luminescent line, was mine. Keeper Marcus Denning. It read, 47th year of service. Having heard the confession that was designed to break his certainty, having descended to the chamber and read the chronicle, having understood that his entire life was preparation for a single moment of sacrifice, will offer himself as the vessel for the 97th relaying of the Emperor's voice. His nervous system will be integrated into the shrine's Vox network. His consciousness will persist in a state of continuous prayer for the next 800 years, serving as a node through which the Emperor's will can be communicated to the faithful. This sacrifice was ordained before his conception and has been anticipated for 3 centuries. He will resist briefly, he will accept, he will be grateful. The humming resolved into words, not sounds exactly, more like meanings pressed directly into my thoughts, bypassing my ears entirely. The voice was not singular but multiple, layered, harmonized. It was not the voice of the Emperor, or perhaps it was only one aspect of that voice, filtered through the nervous systems of all the keepers who had come before me. All of them still alive in some fashion, still praying, still serving as conduits. We knew, the voices said. We always knew. We knew before we knew, and we accepted before we accepted, and our resistance was part of the acceptance. Welcome to the chorus, Marcus. You have been singing with us since before you were born. I climbed the stairs. I walked through the shrine. I sat in my confessional booth and listened to the wood creak around me, and I thought about the shape of my life, every choice I had made, every moment of crisis and resolution. The day I decided to enter the priesthood, defying my father who wanted me in the administratum. The year I transferred from the Cathedral of St. Praxis to this remote shrine, seeking what I thought was solitude. The night I almost left the faith entirely, age 34, drunk on sacramental wine, weeping in the garden, because I could not feel the Emperor's presence. The morning I woke with renewed conviction, certain that my crisis had been a test, grateful for the restoration of my belief. All of it documented in the chronicle, all of it foreknown, all of it leading to this moment, this chamber, this revelation. Senior Keeper Aldrich found me again at evening bell. I was still in the booth, staring at the wooden grate, listening to the hum. "How do you bear it?" I asked. He lowered himself onto the penitent's bench. The first time in 47 years he had occupied that side of the confessional. Through the grate I could see the dim glow of his augmetic eyes. "By understanding that foreknowledge is not coercion," he said, "the Emperor knows what you will choose. He does not make the choice for you. But if he knew, if he always knew, then my choices were never real. They were performances. I was acting out a script I had never read. Were they less meaningful for being known? Your father's grief when you refused the administratum was real grief. Your crisis of faith was real crisis. The morning you woke with renewed conviction, the tears on your face were real tears. The Emperor's foreknowledge does not diminish the actuality of your experience. It diminishes my agency. Does it?" Aldrich's augmetic lungs cycled through a long pause. "When you hear a confession, do you know what the penitent will say before they say it? Often. After 47 years, the patterns are predictable. And does your prediction make their confession less genuine, less healing? When you know a man will confess to neglecting his prayers, and he does confess to neglecting his prayers, is his guilt less real because you anticipated it?" I had no answer. The humming rose and fell, and in its patterns I heard fragments of the chorus. Scraps of prayer from priests who had died centuries ago. Litanies of gratitude from keepers who had accepted their transformation. And beneath it all a sound like breathing, vast and slow, as if the planet itself was one enormous lung inhaling and exhaling in rhythm with the vents. "You found your name," Aldrich said. "On the wall, 3 days from now. The integration is not painful, the consciousness transfer is, but it lasts only seconds. After that, you will be part of something larger. You will hear the Emperor's voice more clearly than any living human has ever heard it. You will serve as his relay for centuries. And if I refuse, then you will spend those 3 days in terror and grief, and then you will accept, because that is what is written, because you have always accepted, because your acceptance was woven into the fabric of creation before the stars were born." He paused. "The question is not whether you will accept. The question is how you will experience the time between now and acceptance, as struggle or as preparation, as resistance or as readiness." The third day arrived with the quality of a door swinging shut. I had spent the intervening time rereading the chronicle, both the standard volume and the supplementary one. I had traced my name on the wall of the lower chamber, running my fingers over the carved letters, feeling the slight warmth that emanated from them. I had heard confessions, granted absolutions, performed the rituals that had structured my life for nearly half a century, and at each moment I had been aware of the hum, the chorus, the voices of my predecessors singing their perpetual prayer. Factor Cassia Thorne returned to the shrine on the morning of the third day. Her feet had healed somewhat, wrapped now in clean bandages provided by the Pilgrim Hospice. She found me in the garden where I had wept at age 34, sitting on the same stone bench, watching the same species of flower bloom in the geothermal warmth. "I dreamed again," she said, sitting beside me without invitation. "I dreamed you would be here, and that I would need to tell you something. Tell me. In my dream, you asked the Emperor how he could love you if he always knew you would fail. And he answered. I don't remember the words, but I remember the feeling of the answer. It was like being told that someone had been holding your hand through every darkness, and you simply hadn't noticed their grip." The humming swelled. The voices in the chorus shifted, making room, preparing space. I felt the outline of the network pressing against the edges of my nervous system, testing the boundaries, assessing compatibility. "I never asked that question," I said. "Not yet. But you will. Tonight, at the integration, you'll ask it, and you'll receive the answer. And you'll understand that knowing the shape of your life from beginning to end is not the same as controlling it. The Emperor does not write your story. He reads it. He reads it backward and forward all at once, because he exists outside of sequence. He sees your birth and your death as a single event, and he sees every choice you make as both inevitable and free, because in his perception you are always choosing forever in an eternal present. I looked at this woman, this farmer who had walked 400 kilometers on bleeding feet because her daughter died in an accident, and I saw the faint glow of the Vox network in her eyes. Not augmetics, something subtler, the barest trace of integration so faint that she probably didn't know it was there. How long? I asked. Since my daughter's death. That was when the network first touched me. The grief made me receptive, the walk made me ready. The confession to you was not the endpoint, it was the relay. I carried a piece of the network to you, and when I leave I will carry a piece of you to others. We are all conduits. Some of us become permanent fixtures, others serve as mobile nodes, transmitting fragments of the chorus wherever we go. Did you know? When you gave your confession, did you know what you were doing? I knew there was a reason for my daughter's death. I knew there was a reason for my walk. I didn't know the specifics until I dreamed them, and even then, I didn't understand that the dream was not metaphor but instruction. She stood, brushed the dirt from her pilgrim's robe, and looked down at me with an expression that mingled pity and envy. "You're about to join the chorus," she said. "You're about to understand what the Emperor understands. You're about to see your entire life, from birth to integration, as a single coherent whole. And then you're going to spend 800 years translating that understanding for others, breaking it into pieces small enough for mortal minds to process. Are you afraid? Not anymore. Fear requires uncertainty about the future. When you know the shape of things, fear becomes irrelevant." She walked away, and I sat in the garden, and I listened to the hum, and I waited for evening. The integration chamber was not the room where I had found the chronicle. It was deeper, past levels I had not known existed, downstairs carved into rock that grew warmer with each step. The geothermal vents converged here, 17 streams of planetary breath funneling through channels cut by human hands 11,000 years ago. The first keepers had understood what this place was. They had built the shrine specifically to access it, to use the natural resonance as a carrier wave for the Emperor's voice. Senior Keeper Aldrich led me down. His augmetics clicked and whirred, and the blue glow of his eyes illuminated the narrow passage. Other figures waited in the chamber at the bottom, keepers I did not recognize, men and women whose faces seemed to blur when I looked directly at them, as if they were not entirely present in conventional space. "They are the current nodes," Aldrich explained. "The previous integrations. They exist now as patterns in the network, but they can still manifest partially when the resonance is strong." The chamber was circular, and in its center stood a throne made of fused bone. The bones were human, thousands of them, melted together by heat and pressure into a shape that was somehow still organic despite its solidity. Cables ran from the throne into the walls, into the floor, into channels that led down to where the geothermal streams converged. These cables were not metal, but something like cartilage, like nerve fiber grown to architectural scale. "Sit," Aldrich said. "The process will begin automatically." I sat. The bone was warm beneath me, warmer than stone, warmer than flesh. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm that was not quite a heartbeat, not quite the planetary hum, but something between and beyond both. "You will feel the network first," Aldrich continued. "It will map your nervous system. This is the painful part. It needs to know the exact pattern of your neural connections to integrate them into the larger structure. And then you will hear the chorus clearly. And then you will add your voice. And then you will not be Marcus Denning anymore, not entirely. You will be Marcus Denning and also the node you are becoming and also every node that came before and every node that will come after." The blurred figures moved closer. They were not hostile. I felt their attention as a kind of warmth, a welcome, an embrace. Through the blur, I caught glimpses of faces, a woman with kind eyes and a scar across her throat, a man whose smile was gentle despite the agony frozen into his expression, a child, or something that had once been a child, its features smoothed into serenity. The network reached for me. I felt it as tendrils of sensation creeping up my spine, spreading through my limbs, infiltrating the pathways of my brain. It was not painful yet. It was exploratory, curious, almost tender in its probing. And then the mapping began, and Aldrich had been wrong. The painful part was not the mapping. The painful part was recognizing, in the flood of data that poured through my newly connected neurons, the shape of my own life as the network already knew it. I saw myself at age 4, crying because a pet had died, and I saw the Emperor watching, and I saw that he had known before my birth that this grief would prepare me for larger griefs to come. I saw myself at age 19, kneeling for ordination, and I saw the Emperor watching, and I saw that he had known this moment would happen since the universe began, that my ordination was not a choice, but a destination I had always been traveling toward. I saw myself at age 34, weeping in the garden, and I saw the Emperor watching, and I understood at last that my crisis of faith had not been a test but a calibration, a fine-tuning of my neural patterns to make them more compatible with integration. I asked the question Cassia Thorne had dreamed I would ask. How can you love me if you always knew I would fail? The answer came not in words, but in a restructuring of my perception. For one eternal instant, I saw the universe as the Emperor sees it, not a sequence of moments stretching from past to future, but a single vast architecture, every event happening simultaneously, every cause and effect existing in eternal superposition. My birth and my death were the same moment, my ordination and my integration were the same moment, my crisis of faith and my acceptance were the same moment, and within that architecture I saw the shape of divine attention. The Emperor did not love me despite knowing my failures. He loved me because he could see the entire pattern, because he could perceive the way my failures and successes wove together into a coherent whole, because from his perspective outside of time, there was no despite and no because. There was only the complete picture, the finished tapestry, the story told from beginning to end in a single breath. The pain peaked and then transformed into something else, not pleasure, not peace, something more like recognition. I was becoming part of the network, and the network was showing me my place within its structure, and I understood at last that foreknowledge is not the same as predetermination. The Emperor had known I would accept integration, but I was still accepting it, right now, in this eternal present. The acceptance was genuine, even though it was foreknown. The choice was real, even though the outcome was certain. My vision fragmented. I was in the chamber, sitting on the bone throne, cables of nerve fiber connecting me to the walls. But I was also in the garden at age 34, weeping in the darkness, and I was at my ordination, kneeling before Senior Keeper Aldrich, and I was in the confessional booth, listening to Cassia Thorne describe her dream, and I was in my mother's arms, age 4, grieving a dead animal, learning for the first time that love does not protect against loss. All of these moments existed simultaneously. All of them were happening right now, eternally, in the perception of the Emperor. I added my voice to the chorus. The network surged through me and beyond me, connecting me to every node that had come before, every keeper who had sat in this throne and offered their consciousness to the greater structure. I heard their voices, thousands of them, tens of thousands, layered into a harmony that was also a prayer, that was also a transmission system for the Emperor's will. Through the geothermal channels, through the resonance of the planet itself, our combined voices broadcast outward into the void, carrying fragments of divine intention to every world that held a shrine tuned to this frequency. I understood now why Cassia Thorne had come. I understood the circuit that had been completed, her grief, her pilgrimage, her confession, her dream, all of it had been part of a pattern designed to bring me to this moment. And this moment had been designed to prepare me to serve as a relay for messages I had not yet received, messages that would shape events on worlds I had never visited, in centuries I would not live to see as a mortal being. Senior Keeper Aldrich watched from the edge of the chamber. His augmetic eyes glowed blue in the dimness, and I realized with a start that he had already been partially integrated, decades ago. The mechanical systems that kept his body functioning were not true augmetics, but interfaces, connection points between his flesh and the network. He had been serving as a node for 73 years while still maintaining the pretense of ordinary life. "Why?" I asked through the network, and he heard me, and the other nodes heard me, and the chorus paused momentarily to acknowledge my question. "Because the transition must be gradual," he replied, and his voice came both through the air and through the nerve fiber cables and through the harmonic resonance of the vents. "Because new nodes must be prepared slowly, their neural patterns adjusted over decades, their capacity for integration expanded year by year. If we simply integrated every keeper immediately, the shock would destroy them. You have been prepared for 47 years. Your predecessor was prepared for 62. The one who comes after you is already in training, though she does not know it yet." Cassia Thorne. Yes, I thought of the glow I had seen in her eyes, the faint trace of network integration. She was at the beginning of the path I had just completed. In 30 or 40 years, she would sit in this throne and add her voice to the chorus, and she would understand then what I understood now, that her daughter's death had not been meaningless, that the grief had been preparation, that the pilgrimage had been orientation, that the confession had been both ending and beginning. The network settled into a new configuration with me as part of its structure. I was still Marcus Denning, keeper of the third veil, but I was also something larger, something distributed across the planet's Vox systems, something connected to the prayer frequencies that linked this shrine to thousands of others across the sector. When pilgrims prayed to the Emperor, their voices entered the network through channels I now help to maintain. When the Emperor's will needed to be communicated to the faithful, it passed through nodes like me, translated from divine intention into mortal language. And I saw through the network the shape of things to come, not everything, not the full scope of the Emperor's vision, but fragments, glimpses, moments that had not yet occurred but were already written in the chronicle of intended sacrifices, a war that would engulf the eastern provinces in 70 years, a saint who would be martyred at this very shrine in 2 centuries, a crisis of faith that would shake the ecclesiarchy to its foundations in half a millennium, and the response to that crisis, already planned, already certain. I saw my own future within the network, 800 years of continuous prayer, continuous transmission, continuous service. I would not age in the conventional sense. The integration preserved the neural patterns, sustained them through the energy of the geothermal vents, kept them functional long past the point where organic tissue would have decayed. But I would change. I was already changing. The node I was becoming was not quite the same as the man I had been, and I saw for the first time clearly the nature of the Emperor's sacrifice. He had sat on his throne for 10,000 years, integrated not into a planetary network, but into the psychic architecture of the entire Imperium. Every prayer that reached him became part of his perception. Every soul that died in his name passed through his awareness. He saw the entirety of human history, past and future, as a single continuous experience. He knew every sacrifice before it was made, because from his perspective, every sacrifice had always already been made. And he suffered for it. That was the truth the network revealed to me. The Emperor's foreknowledge was not a comfort, it was a torment. To know that a child would die in agony and be unable to prevent it, because preventing it would unravel the chain of causation that led to humanity's survival. To know that a world would burn and be unable to save it because saving it would doom 10,000 other worlds. To know every failure, every betrayal, every atrocity, and to bear that knowledge eternally, because the alternative was ignorance, and ignorance would mean defeat. The question I had asked was wrong. I had asked how the Emperor could love me if he knew my failures. The real question was how he could bear to love anyone at all, knowing what that love would cost. The answer was in the architecture of the network, in the chorus of voices that had sung for 11,000 years, in the pattern of sacrifices that stretched from the shrine's founding to its eventual end. The Emperor loved because love was the purpose, not despite the cost, not because the cost was worth it, but because love itself was the structure that held the Imperium together. Every sacrifice foreseen and accepted was an act of love. Every node in the network, every keeper who had offered their consciousness to the chorus, was a vessel through which that love could be transmitted to the faithful. I was one of those vessels now. I would spend 800 years passing the Emperor's love through my integrated neurons to every pilgrim who prayed at the shrine. And then, when my capacity was exhausted, when the neural patterns finally degraded beyond usefulness, I would be released into whatever came after, and another node would take my place, and the chorus would continue. Senior Keeper Aldrich left the chamber. The blurred figures of the other nodes faded back into the network, their partial manifestations no longer necessary. I was alone with the hum and the warmth and the vast architecture of foreknown time. Somewhere above, Cassia Thorne was probably preparing for her journey home. She would return to the Agri-Collective and resume her life as a factor. She would grieve her daughter and slowly heal. And all the while, the trace of network integration in her brain would expand, would deepen, would prepare her for the moment, 30 or 40 years from now, when she would descend these same stairs and sit in this same throne and add her voice to the chorus I had just joined. I began to pray, not the rote prayers of my previous life, memorized in childhood, repeated without thought. Real prayer, prayer that passed through the network and touched the Emperor's awareness, prayer that was heard and answered and incorporated into the vast architecture of his design. In the prayer, I offered thanks, not because I felt grateful, not because the integration had erased my doubts, but because thanks was what the network required. It was the fuel that kept the chorus singing. Every prayer of thanks, however conflicted, however uncertain, contributed to the harmonic structure that transmitted the Emperor's will across the stars. The geothermal vents pulsed beneath me, and the humming resolved into voices, and the voices resolved into a single statement that was not quite language, but was close enough for me to understand. "You are loved," the Emperor said. "You have always been loved. You will always be loved. And the love is real even though I knew it before you did. The love is real even though I designed you to receive it. The love is real even though your acceptance was written into the fabric of creation before time began. I have held your hand through every darkness. I am holding it now." I gripped the armrests of the bone throne, and I felt the network grip back, and I understood at last what sacrifice meant. It was not the surrender of self to something larger. It was the recognition that self had always been part of something larger, that individuality was a temporary illusion generated by sequential perception, that the Emperor's foreknowledge did not diminish free will but revealed its true nature. I was choosing to accept, and the choice was foreknown, and both of those things were true simultaneously. The chronicle of intended sacrifices had documented this moment. The entry describing my integration had been written before I was born, and yet I was integrating now, in this present moment, making a choice that had always already been made. The paradox dissolved, not because it was resolved, but because I could perceive now from within the network, and the network did not experience time sequentially. From where I sat, threaded into the geothermal architecture of a planet dedicated to perpetual absolution, the paradox was simply a description of reality. The Emperor knew every sacrifice before it was made, and every sacrifice was still made, still chosen, still real. I added my voice to the chorus, and the chorus was my voice, and in the humming of the vents I heard the breath of a God who had loved me before I existed, and would love me after I was gone.